It's my pleasure as Michael Clover, TI's Head of Commercial Development, to welcome you to this TI and Apply European Road Freight Rate Benchmark for Q2 2020 webinar today, which is accompanying the release of our new benchmark paper, which will be available after this webinar. I think this has been, I have to say, a very interesting quarter, and indeed a very interesting last 6 months, and it really shows the importance of these kind of partnerships, these kind of initiatives to provide more coverage of road freight rates and track their development and provide better data on those developments, so we can really understand what's happening with all that's been going on with COVID-19 and all the implications that come from it as well. And today we're going to be exploring some of those things as we look at the overall picture in Europe and then break it down into individual lanes. Before we move into proper introductions, I should let you all know that we'll be doing a Q&A session at the end of this. So the main presentation will last about 20 to 25 minutes, and then we'll open up to any questions. And do please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A panel at any time during the webinar, and then we'll come to them at the end. Okay, so as I say, this is the fourth webinar between TI and Apply, focusing on European road freight rates. We've tracked a lot of change over that time. I'm Michael Clover, I'm TI's Head of Commercial Development and oversee the relationship here, and I'm very happy to be moderating this discussion today. But I'm also joined by Andy Rawls, one of TI's key analysts, and our analyst who's been leading on our analysis of road freight rates over the last few quarters. Hi, Andy.
Hi, Michael.
From the Apply side, I'm joined by William Biggery, who is one of Apply's leading experts on the road freight market. He's going to be offering his views on some of the specific lanes and developments we see there. Hi, William. Hi, Michael. And finally, I'm joined by Thomas Leroux, who's the Chief Data Officer at Apply and is responsible for orchestrating, coordinating, aggregating, and analysing all the data that we're going to be using today to underpin our analysis. Hi, Thomas.
Hello, everybody.
Thomas, as you're responsible for all the data at Apply, I think you'd be best placed to give a bit of an introduction into the kind of road freight rate data that we'll be looking at today and how Apply collects it and what else is available through Apply.
Yes, with pleasure. I will shortly introduce Apply and then we'll go through the slides, and we'll have a kind of methodology focus to at the end of the presentation to directly talk about the data and how we are collecting them. Mm-hmm. But as an introduction, so Apply is a digital platform that we created almost 3 years ago now to face several challenges that the supply chain is facing today, such as price volatility, information opacity, some pressure on capacities, and so the idea at Apply we offer two solutions. First one is a marketplace where shippers and carriers get in connection and trade loads directly on the platform. And the second solution is a benchmarking solution that we call compare and analyze, and that give to our users an access to real-time market rates and some trends on the market regarding road transportation in Europe, but also regarding sea freight and air freight on a worldwide basis. And so this is this last solution that we are using today with in partnership with Transport Intelligence to give to take this data and to have some analysis. And this is the data that we will look at during this webinar.
Fantastic, thank you, Thomas. And that does give us, as we'll see now as we move on to the first slide, it's a real picture of actual prices in Europe. So the first slide I'd like to take a look at today is really looking at the overall European level and taking an average of European prices. As we can see, we've seen some falls in the pricing over the last 2 quarters on average there. Andy, could you give us some insights onto what we've seen on the overall European trend and what implications that has?
Yeah, so we've seen a continuous kind of drop in rates now for 3 quarters. This is a 2-year low now, 1.8% down on last year and 0.3% down on the previous quarter. There was obviously the one dominating issue this quarter with the pandemic leading to factories closing and stores shutting down across the continent, which meant that road freight activity really plummeted. Some data from Verizon Connect, which studies tachographs, showed that from mid-February to mid-April, driver hours were down 50% across the continent. So it's an incredible fall there, really. But then this meant that available capacity was very high in general, although there were some sort of nuances which we'll talk about a little bit later on. But this quarter's really shown that the market force is perhaps not as influential as the pricing power of the road freight operators. Might be being expected that a sharp fall in demand ought to lead to a fall in rates, but there have been controls in supply, and operators have factored in the additional operational complexities that the pandemic has brought about into the pricing of road freight on a Europe-wide level. Operators already have a very thin margin, so they won't want to let prices fall too far. So this has really been what's happened in the Q2.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for sharing that overall picture there. I think, as always with this, it's interesting to see the overall European picture. But as we'll see, there are a lot of nuances and variations, all around Europe. And I think you can see some of that when we look at this map here, which shows us some of the international lanes that we're examining for this paper, just to help us understand a bit about the different stories that are occurring across different parts of Europe. And we'll be looking at some of these lanes in a bit more detail later on during the call. So Mark, this does highlight the sort of scope of data available through Upply, really covering all the way across Europe. I don't know if you could talk a little bit more about some of the sort of geographic scope of the data you have available.
Yes, what is quite interesting in this map is to see first that the data that we have at Upply are covering major corridors on the European level. One big thing that we have also within the data is what we call a confidence index. That is quite important because it gives to our users the confidence that we have in the rates that we are displaying regarding the level of data, the frequency of update that we have, so that you can request, for instance, a trip from Romania, a shipment from Romania to Italy, and we will give you the confidence index that we have within this specific corridor. And so here for this webinar, we took some of the highest confidence corridors that we have, and this is what we'll see in the following slides.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, that's what allows us to give those real insights on the market there. So I think one thing that's also interesting that we did have done for the last couple of papers and webinars is to look at the relationship between the distance of those lanes as well, and whether that's changing over time and how that relates to the pricing. So Andy and his team have put together this analysis here, and Andy, I don't know if you could shed some light on that for our,
Yeah. Sure. So this shows all the kind of the lanes that we've covered in this white paper. The red dots are the Q1, the same lane for Q1, and the black dots, generally quite so close to the red dots, are the Q2 lane rate in terms of euro per kilometers. And we can see here that longer routes create cost efficiencies, and this diminishes the significance of the fixed and variable costs associated with the operations. So that's what lowers the euro per kilometer prices. I guess this quarter just shows that how steady that trend is, or how that characteristic is for European international road freight. I guess it's also worth noting that in terms of, if we kind of look at, where would that kind of maybe minimum price be in terms of euro per kilometers, it's dependent on a lot of things, what's fair and acceptable as a price to pay, what will shippers actually pay for this, but also in terms of, what's the cost basis of the road freight operators, how will they be able to price a lane so that they're able to carry the load profitably, both on the front haul and the back haul. Just interesting, the aggregate rate for this is what was 158 per kilometer for Q2, and that was pretty much identical with the quarter before as well.
So it's a very consistent facts there in spite of all the volatility. And I think we're obviously expecting over the last couple of quarters to see an awful lot of volatility as well. And if we look here, we're looking at 3 of the largest volume lanes that we can see in the European market, and trying to understand how that change has actually occurred. So taking some of those average prices and actually looking at the development that we see here on a more granular level. We can see sort of fairly similar stories here, but each lane has its own characteristics. Maybe we could start, William, with the Duisburg-Warsaw lane. If you could add some comments on the trends we've seen there.
Yes, thank you, Michael. In fact, you are right. I will focus only on this graph or this line between Warsaw and Duisburg, because I think it's a bit, the price evolution is a bit counterintuitive. In fact, transport prices between Warsaw and Duisburg increased by 2.3% on the outward and by 2.7% respectively on the return. And one might have expected prices to drop. Let's try to describe the reason. I think there are three. First, transport demand remained consistent between the two countries because the lockdown was less severe than elsewhere. Second, the transport supply of the Polish fleet declined across Europe because carriers feared their truck and drivers would be stranded outside the country. And finally, this trade lane saw a number of bottlenecks spring up due to controls imposed at the border, and carriers appear to have reacted by pushing up prices. So in summary, lower supply than demand and increasing operational costs are the reason for price increases, which is a bit surprising, as I said.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how everyone reacts, and it does go to show the some of the precautionary tale, perhaps, about trying to predict freight prices in the future as well, and the challenges with that. And I mean, as we can see, when we look at Duisburg, Lille, we've seen prices slip back a bit over the last quarter, fall slightly, and then be fairly flat, really, between Paris and Madrid. But Andy, do you have can you provide an explanation as to what we've seen on those lanes?
Yeah, so Madrid to Paris, rates are down quite into Paris, but up a little bit into Madrid. Surely it's lane for online, so the statistics about the number of freight workers that have been kind of counteracts other issues on that lane. So this kind of help lessen the impact from the loss of volumes. Germany to France, rates are still up, year on year, but down a little bit, and these prices in both countries has helped contribute to this. But you see, I suppose across the board, rates. Well, I mean, I suppose here we have a variety of rates, and there hasn't been too large a fall in any of them. But carriers is obviously very important to try and continue to turn a profit on the trade lane, so these prices haven't dropped too much.
Andy, your line is breaking up slightly there, but thanks for sharing those insights on those lanes. It certainly is interesting to see that, as you say, there hasn't been a huge amount of change there, but we do see that variation in change, and that's what I think aggregates up to a relatively stable overall, European European picture. But these, of course, are also the very largest lanes that we see in the market. And obviously, we're now going to have a bit of a closer look at some of the volatility we've seen across all the different lanes, the 36 different international lanes that we cover. So in this chart here, we're looking at basically quarterly volatility and the change in different European road freight rates. I wonder, Andy, if you could explain this and explain what we're showing in this chart and how volatility is changing.
Yeah, sure. So I suppose this was one of the things that I was, I think, willing to predict last time around, was that we would see a little bit more in the way of volatility at a regional level. That doesn't show through. That's mainly because of some of the technicalities around it. So for the benchmark rate to show more volatility, what you really need is lots of lanes changing in a volatile manner at the same time to affect that overall benchmark rate. In Q1, there was a lot of changes in March specifically. That's when kind of coronavirus is starting to lock down countries. But in Q2, the rates changes were, I suppose you had countries opening up and locking down at different rates and different speeds. So that's kind of why that's affected the quarter one, quarter two volatility figure lower than Q1. But if we look at the next slide, the lanes, the individual trade lanes, and if you compare against Q1 and 27, we're showing through in the benchmark volatility rate.
Yeah, so thanks, Andy. Again, I'm afraid your line was breaking up slightly there, but yeah, so you're saying that volatility is slightly down from obviously Q1 where things were there's a lot more change. But if we're looking then at this chart here, which shows the 36 different lanes and the pricing change that we see across all of them, you know, we can see some significant variation in some, and then a very stable picture, you know, with those lanes in the center there as well. You know, obviously last time you mentioned that you know, you were happy to offer a view on volatility, you know, for the next quarter. How do you see volatility developing in Q3?
Yes, I suppose we'd expect things to calm down a little bit from you know, the previous levels from this quarter. That could be affected obviously by local lockdowns. You know, we've seen what's happened in Manchester and Catalonia recently, and you know, that could affect things on a lane by lane basis. But moving into the third quarter, we potentially expect a bit more stability. Again, as I said, lockdowns will determine that largely, but perhaps less volatility than Q2, but more volatility than Q3 of 2019.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So again, also looking really at the sort of dominating factor of the last 6 months, or certainly the last quarter, having been COVID-19, we're looking at the sort of overall effect on the market, and in this case, we're comparing month to month some of the key lanes that we examine in this benchmark, and looking at some of the variation there. So obviously these two charts tell a bit of a different story. Andy, would you like to offer some insights on that? Yeah,
so I suppose you know, laws of supply and demand typically would dictate that a fall in demand with no change in supply ought to lead to a strong drop in rates. It depends on pricing strategy, but it's not unreasonable to think that would be the case. But there's more nuance in the picture in Q2. We certainly saw on a number of lanes that with the effective increase in available capacity relative to demand, which had plummeted, there was a fall in rates. You saw that in Milan to Warsaw was down 9% month on month into May and fell further into June. Lille Antwerp fell 9% before recovering. Duisburg to Lille fell 8% in May. But this didn't show as the main issue everywhere. You know, that could be because, you know, furlough schemes or alterations to driver schedules. You know, Central Eastern European drivers returning home and then having to, you know, being more tricky to redeploy them later to lanes when, you know, demand is picking up again. These are all influential, and this. And in addition, I suppose as well, you think it's like border delays, as William mentioned earlier, and carriers like unwilling to sacrifice their already thin margins meant that prices were steady or even up on some lanes. So we can see that here. I think, you know, Warsaw Milan was up 9% in May. Rotterdam Lille was up 3% in April. Duisburg to Warsaw was up 5% in May. So it's perhaps more than meets the eye in terms of the supply demand picture.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting to bear in mind when we're trying to think about pricing dynamics in the future as well, that, you know, this has been a bit of a test, and some of the assumptions may be slightly disproven by you know, what's happened in pricing over the last quarter or so. Something else that I'm sure that we've all noticed over the last few months is the precipitous decline in diesel prices and oil prices, of course, and the not quite so precipitous decline in freight rates. And we've mapped out the relationship here for you using our quarterly road freight rate benchmark and mapping it out against EU average diesel prices to see the trend there. William, could you give us a view on this trend and the correlation between these two value sets?
Yes, Michael. In fact, the effects of diesel on the price of transport are undeniable, but there are several reasons why the correlation is not perfect. First, there is a phase difference between the cost at the pump and its impact on the price. For those who have an indexing formula, you have to wait until the end of the reference period to change the price. And for those who do not have one, it is necessary to wait for the validation of the negotiation between the shipper and the carrier. And second, the share of the cost of diesel, of the cost of the total cost of transport varies greatly depending on the type of transport, distances traveled, and countries of the fleet. For the countries of Western Europe, so I mean UK, France, Germany, Benelux, Italy, wage costs are higher, which mechanically lowers the share of diesel between 23 and 30%, compared to the countries of Central Europe, where the share is between 33 and 38%. So in summary, there is a correlation between the two curves, but many factors come to modify the pairing.
Thanks, William. Andy, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I suppose, I mean, the other side, I mean, the diesel is probably the one which is the most volatile of the kind of the cost components within road freight. You know, apart from that, wages are very important, but don't tend to fluctuate so quickly. And the other sort of more fixed costs there as well, you know, things like maintenance, repairs, taxes, that kind of thing. So that's why I suppose, you know, we've seen quite a very stark drop in diesel prices into this quarter, but you know it won't necessarily translate directly into a one-to-one change. I think the correlation with the R coefficient we had for this was 0.7, so it does integrate a pretty strong correlation. But as William said, it's not perfect by any means.
Yeah. Fantastic. All right. So if we're looking back to how that might apply, you know, what kind of influences we're thinking about the supply side effects, we're thinking about the fuel price change, and we look at the biggest price change that we've tracked over the course of this quarter and the last few quarters, in fact, has been on the Madrid-Duisburg lane, as you can see here, diverging very greatly. William, can you offer some insights onto why we've seen this trend?
Yes, of course, I will try. Spain, in fact, is the food sector's biggest player. It claims several numbers for one spot as the world's biggest exporter, notably for oranges, strawberries, lettuces, mandarin, etc., and tomatoes. And because Spain is a major exporting agricultural power, the Spanish fleet, of which more than 40% of the trailers are refrigerated, is the first European flag for refrigerated transport. And growth in the volume transported internationally jumped by more than 20% between 2017 and 2019, and by more than 40% between 2016 and 2017. So this explains why we observe a constant increase in price leaving Spain and a decrease in entry. And with the corona crisis, the sudden shutdown of automotive and non-essential and essential industries shatters the transport pattern of the entire refrigerated transport profession, which had no choice but to carry out dead headings run. So this new situation has had two major effects: a decrease in capacity. Some carriers, for fear of being unable to pass the cost to their customers on, have preferred to leave the trucks in the parking lot, and an increase in rates, which can in some case exceed 40%. So here is a simple way how we can explain the big difference between the outward and the return prices.
Thank you, William. That's an excellent explanation of the trend we've seen. It goes to show the importance of understanding those underlying dynamics on each individual lane to really understand those trends that we see. You know, we always like to, I think, in the webinar, not only show the biggest changes that have occurred, but also to highlight some of the lanes that we think are, you know, in the process of undergoing significant change. And one we picked out as a lane to watch this quarter is Prague to Duisburg as well, where we see you know, the convergence of the head haul and back haul lanes there. Andy, can you offer some insights on this?
Yeah, that's exactly why this one was picked out, was the fact that Prague-Duisburg surpassed the usual head haul for the first time in June 2020. And prior to that, in fact, rates actually slipped to a near 3-year low in April. So it's a really drastic change from April to June. Automotive volumes are very important here. The industry accounts for about 1/10 of Czech Republic's economic activities. And the majority of Czech automotive factories had closed down through April, with overall output was falling to 1/10 of prior levels. So factories did return into the end of April and into May, thinking of, you know, the big Hyundai and Continental plants that are in the Czech Republic. Production started to increase. Now there's clearly a lag with transport volumes. You know, you have to, you know, with the manufacturing going on, you have to work through the kind of existing industry. But work through the existing inventory. But this is as this has happened, we've kind of forced prices up into June. And also with the rest of the continent's volumes improving, Czech drivers were redeployed around Europe, which some slowed supply on this tightened supply on this lane. And actually, Lithuanian drivers are the other sort of major nationality hauliers on this trade lane. But there was strict border checks between Lithuania and Poland, which restricted the ability of mates to return to work, which again limited supply. So this has seen that the front haul and head haul rates switch around this month, in June there. So I mean, this could continue into the future. It's difficult to say. It could be, the Czech automotive industry was actually very resilient in 2019 in spite of a global downturn. So this trend could be continued for a little bit as might be a one-off, but it'll be something one to watch.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. That's very interesting, and it's actually just one of a huge number of different, very interesting lanes that we've seen over the last few quarters, obviously with everything going on with COVID-19. So there's plenty more to learn if you check out the white paper, and of course, want to visit Upply to understand more about all the different lanes that they cover with their road freight rates. And if you're thinking about doing that, you might want to understand a bit more about how the data is really put together, what these figures and what these prices we've been showing you really mean. And I think, Thomas, that's where you'll come in to just explain a bit about the methodology and how the data and the prices are provided.
Yes, I will be very brief on that so that we can go on the Q&A. But if you have any question or additional questions, you can, of course, come to me. And we have also a full document describing our methodology. The big idea is that we are collecting data from several sources, from partners, of course, but also from our users and from our marketplace. So we are talking about here real transactional rates. So real rates about shipments that went from point A to B. And we are collecting this rate on a daily basis. And every week we update our prices on the website. So we have a team of about 10 data scientists that are working on the data. And yes, this is how we are getting these rates.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you, Thomas. So we can move on now to the Q&A session. So thanks all for listening to the presentation and the panelists' views on the different freight rate developments. We'd love to have some of your questions. So please do feel free to ask anything you like, and the panelists will do their best to answer the questions. We've had a few come in already, so we can start with some of those, I think. So one of those questions that is asking, the fall of diesel prices has softened the blow for carriers. Do you think that's a long-term trend? William, maybe you'd like to answer that one first.
Excuse me, I was on mute. Yeah, the decline in diesel, I think, was a breath of fresh air for carriers who pass on cost late. But we all know that fuel is bound to go up, either because the market goes up or because taxes go up. So the carbon footprint is an even more sensitive subject than before, and I think they have the carriers don't have to struggle against the history. So I think that the diesel is going to increase and to increase again. That's the story.
Okay, another question we've had. Thanks, William, for that. Actually, just coming in now is well, there's a couple of simple questions here actually about the methodology. So probably one's for Thomas, really, but one is Upply's data based on spot or contracted rates, and the other is doesn't include intermodal rates. So Thomas, I don't know if you could answer those quickly.
Yes, it does not include intermodal rates regarding rail and road transportation. So you have intermodal between air freight and sea freight. So we can do a door-to-door benchmark, including the parts in truck from origin or destination. Regarding the other question, we include both. It depends on the mode of transportation, but on road transportation in Europe, we include both spot and contract within the data. So if we go and look on Upply, you will have a minimum, maximum, and a median rate. So you can see the dispersion of prices on the market, and this dispersion will include some spot and contractual prices. Usually, of course, the spot prices are in the upper bound of the market.
Okay, thanks for that, Thomas. We've had another question from the audience asking. This is something that I think TI has done a bit of research on in the past and is looking to do a bit more on now, but asking what the number of bankruptcies from carriers, and if there has been a large number of that, and if there's been much impact on capacity and pricing. Andy, do you want to have a go at answering that one?
Sure. Yeah. So I suppose, I mean, yes, we have done some work on it before, but I suppose, I mean, one of the things really helping out so far has been the fall in diesel price, which has kind of really softened the blow for carriers. So those kind of things are helpful. The furlough schemes, job retention schemes have been very useful for the market so far. Yeah, I guess how long these continue for is a question which will, I guess, to dictate, I suppose, whether these bankruptcies really come into play on us. But for now, it's these kind of support schemes have been very useful in kind of keeping the market afloat in some in some instances, especially for some of the smaller carriers who've had to who've lost substantial amounts of volume in this time.
Okay, thanks, Andy. And another question that's just come in as well, so I'll just read this one out for you, is the drop in volumes has masked the continuing sharp drop in the number of available drivers across Europe. Some estimates put the driver vacancy rate at now 35%. So the question is, when the pandemic ends, will the trucking industry be able to serve its customers? Will there be enough drivers to serve the demand? And do we need to make a major move to intermodal to make that possible? Anyone want to answer that one?
Yeah, I suppose what we're likely to see now is unemployment increasing quite dramatically. So if there is a sort of demand for continued road freight, there will be a high proportion of the general population unemployed. So that might be a route into increasing the number of drivers there are in the market. So it's a bit of a change from how things have been for the last few years, also with the driver shortage becoming more and more acute. With the unemployment rates increasing, you might find more people moving into trucking.
Yeah, absolutely. So that could actually be a bit of a dodgy period, but then see a bit of a surge in people coming forward to take up some of those jobs and roles in the market. Okay, thanks for that one. We also had a question earlier on today, which was ahead of the webinar, just asking about the impact of the mobility package on the road freight market. Andy, have you got a view on that?
Yes, I suppose. I mean, this has been rumbling on for a while, but it's been passed recently. I think the rules on driving time regulation will be implemented shortly, and that's going to add sort of additional complexity for carriers. The scheduling will become more tricky, so there might be some additional costs kind of included there. I think in the longer term, when we have rules on, I guess, driver ages having to, drivers having to be paid at the rates of the market they're in, that might see increased operational costs maybe into the future. It might well be that carriers start increasing rates in advance of that. But these are certainly things which could increase the operating costs for carriers, and we've seen this quarter that pricing is really very dependent on the cost basis as well. So that could well be included and be looking at something which might push rates up in the future. Okay,
thank you, Andy. And I think possibly the last question here would be, you say that rates fall to a 2-year low. However, there doesn't seem to be such a sharp drop compared to the size of the economic collapse, thanks to the capacity control strategies of some of the carriers. Do you think the hauliers can afford to continue this strategy? Any takers for that one?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, start. Yeah. I suppose. There have been decreases on a quarterly basis for the last few quarters. So I suppose that has pushed that down a little bit. I mean, yeah. Ultimately, you need for a lot of hauliers are going to be dependent on demand coming in. So as you know, the furlough schemes are kind of unwound and these support schemes are kind of slow, then it may be that some hauliers just can't afford it. So yeah, possibly.
Okay.
Yeah, but if I can add something,
Go ahead.
It is true that the carriers in Central Europe they limited the capacity. This is totally true because they want their drivers to come home. So it reduced transport capacity and helped keep the prices down. But I have also to say that there was also government aid that carriers were able to benefit from resorting to short-time working. And in France, the aid has been particularly generous. And yet, according to figures from the CNR, this is a French official organism for observing transport costs. At the moment, in July, only 2% of drivers are still on short time. So for me, this means that the recovery in demand seems strong. And everyone is back to work. So there is therefore no intention of the carriers to limit the market.
Well, that's certainly quite a positive note to end our Q&A session on. So thank you, William. Thinking of demand returning to a good level again. So thanks everybody for joining us today. Well, actually, we've just had one more question come in, which we might go to. Asking about emissions and sustainability here. Asking, due to the reaching the goal of CO2 emissions on road freight in Europe is a bit of a challenge. What's your expectation as to how this would impact carriers and removing some of the older trucks from the market, which are obviously offering more emissions? Any views on that?
Yeah, so I suppose, I mean, there was a lot of a spate of kind of new trucks purchased towards last year when sort of tachographs became mandatory. There was a real spike there. So I mean, this is likely to be where some of the investment has been in kind of road freight fleets in the last sort of year or so. Whether that continues is difficult, but that's these kind of more efficient trucks would have come into the market last year. As I say, it's tricky to know what will happen in future with that, though.
Okay. Actually, sustainability and looking at those kind of emissions is a big push for transport intelligence at the moment in terms of our wider market research for across the different logistics market segments. And part of that will be looking at some of those emission strategies for reducing emissions as part of your fleets and so on. So, if you do want to know more. Oh, sorry, Thomas.
Yeah, no, I would just add something on the CO2 emission. This is something that we see a lot at Upply because we have a CO2 emission benchmark also. So you can have the price from from Berlin to Paris, for instance, but also the CO2 emissions. And I know that many of our clients and users today are coming to us to try to benchmark and to see how to adapt their supply chain to have a balance between price and CO2. So there is a change in the market from the shipper side where they try to optimize the supply chain, taking into account the CO2 emission. So maybe it's the beginning of something. We will see that, but yeah, this is something that we're experiencing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Thomas. And possibly one last question was just come in, for which looks like it's your kind of question on methodology again. He's asking about, are these prices relating to standard trucks or do they apply for temperature control trucks?
So we have both. When we have data from many kind of trucks for the standard general cargo truck, let's say, from the reefers also. For hazardous goods, if you have rolling, we have several type of trucks, and so depending on the lines that you're asking, we might be able to give a benchmark on the reefer, on the rolling, on something like that.
Okay, thank you.
But the one that we are using in this webinar are general cargo.
Yes, yeah. So you need to speak to Upply if you want to get those more specific rates. And that, you know, on this last slide here, just if you do want to contact TI or Apply, here are the contact details for you with any other follow-up questions, or if you'd like to learn more about what Apply can offer in terms of road freight rate benchmarking in more detail, or learn more about what TI can offer in terms of market intelligence for the wider logistics industry, then please do get in touch with us. So thanks everyone for tuning in. We're very pleased to have you all listening. There'll be a paper sent out to you so you can read in detail the analysis of these trends that we've explored today, and also we'll make the webinar recording available to all of you. So yes, thanks for joining us. The last thing for me to do is just to thank Andy, William and Thomas for their contributions today, and we'll see you all for the Q3 webinar in just a few months.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.